But point of fact, Kharkiv is only 30 kilometers from the Russian border. The fact that Moscow never took Kharkiv since this big invasion began is
Is
a failure of
remarkable.
the.
Yeah, yeah. We're going to talk about Ukraine now. Lots been going on today. President Zelensky, air defences need to be strengthened around Kharkiv. That's Ukraine's second city as Russia targets the surrounding region. In a new offensive, Zelensky told Antony Blinken, the United States Secretary of State, who made a surprise visit to Kyiv on Tuesday, that Ukraine needs at least 2 air defence batteries for the northeastern city, which is being pummeled by drone and missile strikes.
I want to discuss with you about some today, about some, I think, very important issues. The first, the decision of the package was crucial for us. It's very important to get it as quick as possible. And the second one point is air defense, the biggest deficit for us. I think that the biggest problem, yes, and we need today 2 Patriots for Kharkiv region, because the people are under attack, civilians and warriors, everybody there under Russian missiles.
John Herbst is the director of the Eurasia Centre at the Atlantic Council and former US ambassador to Ukraine. John, good to speak to you.
Nice to speak with you.
There's a lot happened here today. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said that Russia must pay to rebuild what he's destroyed in Ukraine. But he's also said that the support that's required is actually coming. They've been asking for this support for a long time. Are Ukraine getting exactly what they need to protect Kharkiv?
It's clear that the almost 7-month delay in a large aid package to Ukraine has enabled Russia to take additional territory from Ukraine and to launch a more effective aerial bombardment of Ukraine's infrastructure and aerial bombardment of the city of Kharkiv. The problem there can be laid at the feet of some populist Republicans in the House who have no clue how important the defeat of Russia in Ukraine is to American national interests. But it's also true that the Biden administration has been slow in sending Ukraine more advanced weapons that it is needed at every stage of the war since the large invasion, which is now, 26, almost 27 months old. If we had provided Ukraine with substantial F-16s a year ago, the glide bombs, which are wreaking havoc on Kharkiv right now, would not be in play, because they are launched by Russian jets in Russian territory. If Ukraine had F-16s and permission from the United States to attack Russian military in Russia that's attacking Ukraine, the siege of Kharkiv would not be such a problem. Not so many Ukrainians would be dying. It's also worth pointing out, following up on what Zelensky said about Patriot batteries, that the United States has dozens of Patriots, American allies have dozens of Patriots. When Russia began its massive bombardment in the late fall of 2022, the West finally decided to send Patriots to Ukraine, protecting Kyiv. Ukraine needs another 9 or 10 right now. So far, despite the big bombardment that began 2 months ago, we have not seen more Patriot batteries arrive in Ukraine, although Germany is now promising to send some. That's one small step forward. More needs to be done.
It's been a dramatic week, though, hasn't it? I mean, you talked about the bombardment of Kharkiv, but some of the surrounding villages, populations of 20,000, 30,000 people have been evacuated over the last couple of days. It's Ukraine's second city. It's the cultural heart of Ukraine. But this is also a new route of attack by the Russians on Ukrainian territory, isn't it, John? They've still got what's going on in the Donbass, but is this central to their campaign to take more territory, or is it trying to take away, trying to be, a diversion, if you like, to what's going on in the Donbass?
I think the Russians will take back any territory they can, whether it's in the northeast around Kharkiv, or whether it's in Donbass to the south, or whether it's south of Kherson in mainland southern Ukraine. But point of fact, Kharkiv is only 30 kilometers from the Russian border. The fact that Moscow never took Kharkiv since this big invasion began is
It's
a failure of
remarkable.
the.
Yeah, yeah.
But point of fact, there are several flaws, important flaws in American policy right now. The administration says Ukraine cannot use weapons we supply to hit Russian military targets in Russia. Right now, you have mass Russian forces on the border with Ukraine near Kharkiv in Russia, which Ukraine cannot attack. So the incremental gains Moscow is making, that's all that they're making, are enabled by American restrictions, not wise restrictions, timid restrictions on Ukraine use of American weapons. And again, if Ukraine was able to shoot at the Russian jets in Russian territory, which are bombarding Kharkiv, fewer Ukrainian citizens in Kharkiv would be dead.
John, the Ukrainians are those shooting into Russia, though, aren't they? They're getting further and further. I mean, some of the military installments that they've hit over the past 6 months have been close to Moscow.
With their own weapons. And of course, the Brits have wisely told
That they can.
Ukrainian
Yeah.
storm ships to attack into Russia. But let's face it, the best weapons and the greatest quantity of weapons come from the United States. So when we put restrictions, the impact on Ukraine is larger.
Why is the US putting those restrictions on? Simply because they're fearful of a wider conflict?
That has been the principal reason. And Moscow has had some success with nuclear intimidation. We have self-deterred in ways what I would say are unbecoming a superpower and against our interest by taking Putin's bluffs as reality. Of course, we have to consider seriously when we are in a confrontation or when our allies or partners are in a confrontation with a nuclear power. But we have never in our history before this conflict had senior administration officials say they cannot take measure X or measure Y because the other side may go nuclear. That's a posture of weakness, which undermines American security and, of course, means additional destruction and death in Ukraine.
Yeah. Can I just ask you before you go about Anthony Blinken, who's been in Ukraine today, talking about, Russia paying to rebuild what it's destroyed in Ukraine. Of course, Russia directly is not going to pay. What he's talking about here is Russian assets. I mean, how much money is there that can be moved from Russian assets in order to pay for the enormous cost of rebuilding that country?
The estimates right now is that Russia has inflicted about $500 billion worth of damage on Ukraine. I suspect those estimates are on the low side, and of course, in a year, the estimates will be much greater because additional conflict means additional damage. But there are over $300 billion worth of frozen Russian state assets in the international financial system. The administration is actually among the leaders in the West in calling for the steps taken to transfer those assets to Ukraine. The UK and Canada are also, I would say, sympathetic to that. But the other members of the G7 are very timid and unwilling to allow the transfer of anything but the dividend payments yearly, roughly $3 billion to Ukraine. The Biden administration has come up with an idea that would enable the transfer immediately of $50 billion. Even bolder and more visionary thinkers like Philip Zelikow, former Secretary of the
Yeah.
Treasury Rob Zellick, call for the simple transfer of the $300 billion to Ukraine in relatively short order, and also to some others who have been negatively affected by Moscow's aggression in Ukraine.
It feels like it's something we're going to be talking about a lot more, doesn't it? All those Russian assets in the coming months and how quickly they get transferred over. John, absolutely great to have your insight tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
John Herbst, the director of the Eurasia Centre at the Atlantic Council, former US ambassador to Ukraine. Fascinating to hear what he was saying about those assets, isn't it? That there is still some hesitancy, is the only way you can put it, between some G7 countries about transferring Russian assets. So that's assets, money seized from Russian companies or banks in foreign countries outside of Russia, and using those billions of pounds, billions of dollars to pay to rebuild the parts of Ukraine that have been destroyed by Russian military attacks. You feel like there's going to be plenty more to talk about on that issue, why it's being held up